So today what we're going to do is we're going to go over classes in JavaScript. We're also going to talk about the this keyword and object-oriented programming. And I'm going to get to it because we got a lot to cover. So let's say that we're given a task of sometimes this happens on like coding interviews, or sometimes it's when you're trying to figure out how to model data in an object-oriented way. Sometimes it's just working with data structures and trying to figure that out. So maybe 6 or 8 months ago, I made a big long playlist about data structures, algorithms, big O notation, things like that. So if you haven't watched that playlist, I would totally suggest that you do, because a lot of this stuff that we're gonna be talking about right now is kind of directly from that. So anyways, let's say that we're given a task and they say, hey, we want you to build a couple of classes. We want you to model some users. And each user is going to have a name, a title, and a wage. Like a name, a title, meaning like what their job title is, and a wage. And then what we want to do is we want to be able to list out users, find get how many users there have been created, and mess with the data. And we'll this is called data plucking. We're going to do some data plucking here. All right, so first thing that we need to do, okay, we need to make a class of users, right? Each one's going to have a name, title, and a wage, and then we'll figure out where we're going from there. So let's just go class user. And when we do that, whenever you make a class, you have to make a constructor function. Think about a constructor as being like a blueprint for the object that you're going to create. You know, if it's a user, we know that it's going to have a name, title, and a wage. That means that each individual object that's created, each instance of a user object that's created is going to have a name, title, and wage. And we'll get that through our constructor. So we'll just go like this, constructor. And basically what we do, it's a function, so we just pass in name, title, and wage. When we do that, that's when because constructor gets called as soon as the new keyword is used. So if we go down here and we're like, const user equals new user, and then we're going to pass something in like name, title, whatever. When this is called, this new keyword is called, and this user is a class that's going to be created, the first thing to run is the constructor function every time. It has the initial values of what all the properties are going to be. So for this one, we'll say this.name, because this dot name equals name. This, in this context, refers to the user. This is the user right now. The this keyword is pointing to the user class. If you did this out here, it would be pointing to the global object because we're working in Node. If you did it in a browser, it would be pointing to the window object. But for right now, since we're in a class and we're using this is pointing to this user class. That's what it's pointing to. So this.name equals name, this.title equals title. And this will become more clear when we start writing these out. This.wage equals wage. So let's make a user. So we'll just go const user equals new user, because again, we have to use that new keyword, so the constructor will run. And it's going to take in a name. We'll just call it Mike. And he's a software engineer. Cool job. And then his wage is, let's just say, 100, meaning $100,000 per year. So we can assume that the number as the third argument is going to be representative of thousands of dollars per year. So 1,000 per year, so 100,000 per year. And then we can just, let's take a look at that real quick. So we'll console.log user after it's been created. And then down here we'll run it, main.node, main.js. And you can see that we've created a user, Mike, who has a title of software engineer, who has a wage of 100 grand a year. So let's make another one. Except this one will be user 2, and this will be user 3. User 2 is, let's say she's Cindy. She's also a software engineer, but she makes 120 a year. So she's like a senior software engineer. Let's say SR dot. And then this is a junior software engineer, and he only makes like, I don't know, 80. I don't know what junior engineers make. I was never a junior engineer. And let's say Mike, Cindy, and then this could be Rob. Rob is the junior engineer. So we can console log any of those, whatever. It'll just show us that we've made, new instances of that object. But what we really want to do is now that all these users are being made, what we want to do is store them somewhere. So, and you want to keep track of how many you're making. So imagine it's not 3, but it's like 3,000 that you're making. You want to keep track of exactly how many you got. So how will we do that? Well, again, with the custom data structures and algorithms that you can come up with, you might be like, well, I'll just make a users list class where I'll have a property that's an array in there called the list. And in the list, I can push in all these users, and then I can have a property on it called length, which I increase every time that I create a new user. I'm going to increase that. So let's take a look at how we do that. So let's just go class user list, and we could just go constructor because every class gets a constructor. It's the first thing that runs. We're not passing anything in here. We're just going to have properties on it. So we'll just say this dot list. This is going to be the actual list. It's going to be initialized as an empty array, and then we can say this dot length is going to be initialized as 0. Cool. So now that we have that, let's create a list, and it'll be an empty list, but let's just go const list, or let's call it new list. New list is going to equal new list, or user list, like that. And let's console log user list right here, or new list rather. Let's take a look, see what we get. And we get a new list. Now, let's take a look. What would happen if we just did it like that and we didn't invoke it? We just put a semicolon there and we ran it again. The same thing would happen. So it's the VS Code that I have, it automatically invokes this because it knows what you're trying to do. So just always invoke it when you do it, because that's what actually runs the constructor function and actually creates the object. So now we have a list down here. It's called new list, and we have these users. So what we want to do is push these users into this list. So what we can do is in here, we can just make a method. A method is nothing more than a function that's attached to a class or object. So we're going to make a method. And with this kind of syntax in JavaScript, this class-based syntax, when you're making a method, you don't have to go like const something and set it to a variable and then do an arrow function. And you also don't have to use the function keyword. You can just go, what are we doing here? We're adding users. So we'll just say add user and then build it like that. And that's the syntax for making a method that's attached to a class. So we're going to make a user. So we're going to have to pass in here the name, the title, and the wage. And what we'll do with that is we'll just go const new user is going to equal new user. And we'll just create the user here in the add user rather than, we're just creating them willy-nilly down here. We'll actually create them within this method right here. So const new user equals new user, and it's going to take in the name, the title, and the wage that's passed in here as parameters or arguments on the function is going to be passed in right here because of Clojure, we have access to those right there. Okay, cool. So we have that. We have the new user. So now what we want to do, let's just console log the new user and make sure that he's being created properly. So let's go new user right there. And then what we're going to do, if we want to call this add user, since it's attached to the user list class, we have to make the list, which is new list, and we have to call it like this. So we'll go new list dot add user, because add user is on the, I don't even want to get into prototypical inheritance and things like that, but add user it belongs to new list, which is basically the class of user list, right? Okay, so we're going to pass in a name here, Mike. He's a software engineer, and he makes 100K a year. So that's what we're doing right now. So let's see what happens. Because we have the console log right here, it's just going to log out the user, so we can see we successfully created the user. Now instead of just creating the user, what we want to do is actually push it into this list. So this.list. So to access this.list, you can just say this.list.push. And this is just random array manipulation, pushing something into an array, and we'll push in that new user. And then, because we said we wanted to keep track of the length, we can go this.length ++ every time we create a user. And then we can just return this. And when we return this, it's just going to return this object here. So let's take a look. We're going to have to console log this because we have return statements now instead of console logs. Come on, baby. This video is getting long. I'm trying to keep it quick. Okay, so there we go. So we've made that. Now let's console log that and see what we get. And there we go. So our user list has a user in it, that user that we created, right? So now our user list has a user and we have a length of 1. Awesome. So let's maybe create a couple more. Instead of console logging them out, though, I'm going to take these console log statements off here. And let's just make a couple more. Let's copy this. And we did 3, and the second one was 120. And she was a senior software engineer, and her name was Cindy, if I'm remembering right. And this guy's name was Rob. He was a junior. When I say I was never a junior senior software engineer, I was lying, so don't take me to task. Okay. So there we go. So we've created these with the add user. So now let's just console.log the new list and see what we got. See if everything's working out. So we go down here, run it, and you can see now our length is 3, and in our list property we have this array of objects, which is basically all the data you're usually going to be working with in JavaScript is just an array of objects. So cool, we've got some users here. So let's make a couple more because I want to show you how we can maybe filter through these and change some things about it. So let's say not everyone is a senior software developer or a software engineer or something like that. Let's say we've got one more software engineer right here. He makes 100, and his name is Frank. And then Johnny, he's a marketing guy. I don't know how much they make. I legitimately don't know how much they make. Let's just say they make 85 grand a year. And then here, this is April Ludgate, and she's worked her way up. She's a project manager. She makes 150. I don't know. Let's just say that. Okay, so now we've created all these, and if we console log out again, we have a length of 6 with all these different jobs. So now let's say it's the end of the year, you're looking at your budget, and you're like, well, we need to figure out who's making what and where we can cut. Maybe can you make a method that just gives us back all the software engineers and their information, so then we can look through it and see what's up, see who we need to bump up to senior engineer. And you're like, okay, boss, I can make a method like that. So let's say that what we want this method to do is to return all software engineers only in an array. Now, with this specific kind of array manipulation, the higher order array helper methods in JavaScript make this, fairly painless. And if you don't know about the higher order array helper methods, I highly suggest that you check them out. I have a bunch of videos on them. Some of them are like map, filter, find, every, sum, reduce. There might be a few more, but mainly the ones that you're going to use is like map and react. You're going to use filter a lot. You're going to use sometimes every, sometimes some, a lot of times reduce, for each. Sometimes you'll use that. But anyways, let's just see how it works. So basically, let's just call this method get software engineers. We'll just call it get SE. And so with get SE, it's not going to take any arguments, but what we're going to do is we're going to return, because this is how the higher array helper methods work. We're just going to return them directly. So we're going to return this .list.map, or .filter rather, because we want to filter out some of them. That gives us access to an item and a callback right here. And what we can do is return right here if item.name is equal to software engineer. And it has to be exactly that. Now, there's a lot of steps that you can go through to watch this data more, to where you could make sure everything's lowercase and then compare it to what's in the database or blah, blah, blah. We're just keeping it really simple right now. So when we run this get SE, it's going to return an entirely new array without mutating the original array. It's going to return a new array that only has items with the name of software engineer within this .list. So let's take a look here. Let's console.log get SE, was E capitalized? Yeah, get SE, and then invoke it. And then let's see what we get here. Let's run it down here, node main.js. We got a problem. Get SE is not defined. Oh, because it's not get SE, it's new list dot get SE. And you could probably pull this kind of functionality out into another class, one that's like a UI class, or maybe something that has to do with changing the data. But we're just going to leave it on the new list. So new list dot get SE, and let's see what we get here. and we get an empty array. Did I not spell software engineer right? Let's go this. Oh, it's not name, it's title. That's what it is. Item.title. And let's make sure we spelled software engineer correctly. And we didn't. Okay, cool. So we avoided an error. So now it just returns back that we have two software engineers. We have Mike and Frank. And if you look through our list, our very small list, we do software engineer, line 32, and line 36. Now imagine if this was hundreds of thousands of users or employees or something like that, and you wanted to get back those. So let's see how we would work with maybe something else. Let's say that we wanted to filter only people that made at least $100,000 a year. So we'll say get high earners or get high salaries. These method name stuff, but whatever. What we do same way, we just go return this dot list dot filter. We want to filter through it. That gives us access to an item and a callback, and then we'll return if item dot wage is greater than or equal to 100, because that's 100K. So if we go down here again, instead of saying get all the software engineers, we just say get high salaries. Then you can see if we run it, then we get all of these. We get software engineers, senior software engineers, project managers. This is what's called data plucking, where we're plucking little bits of data out depending on what we want. And you can see that you can pretty much do this with anything. We want the software engineers, or maybe we want the salaries, or maybe we want the junior engineers. We could filter through that and just see if the item.title is equal to junior engineer. Or maybe we want, we just want a list of all the names, like no matter what they are. We just want a list of the names. How would we do that, for example, if we just, well, we're not even going to get into that. This video is getting longer. But, so, in this video, we went over how to build out classes, how two different classes can interact with each other, what the this keyword is, we touched on that, how to use some of the higher order array helper methods in JavaScript to do some data plucking. And we also learned about when you're creating a new class, the first thing that's going to be run is always going to be the constructor function, right here. And that's going to contain the parameters of basically the blueprint of the objects that you're going to create. So this videos went long. We covered a lot of ground. Watch it a few times and just practice working with those high order array helper methods in JavaScript. And yeah, it'll help you with this kind of data manipulation. I will say firsthand, the area when I made a real jump in being a software engineer was when I was able to start working with large bits of data like this and kind of just slicing through them very easily. And a lot of the new JavaScript that's been written, a lot of the core JavaScript language now makes this a lot easier to do than it was in the past. So you really behoove yourself to learn this stuff pretty good. So anyways, take it easy. Happy New Year. Yeah.